Hello and welcome to Where to Go. I'm James Atkinson, Senior Brand Manager at DK Eyewitness.
And I'm Lucy Richards, Senior Editor at DK Eyewitness.
And welcome to Where to Go, where every fortnight we find out more about the world's favourite travel destinations with those people who know those places best. But this week, we have one of our special episodes. So one of our, we sort of call them kind of travel lives episodes, where we interview someone who's just, it's got more than one destination they can talk about, who can really kind of give us an insight into just the kind of vast sort of experiences that you can have around the world. And I think this person really, really personifies that. So,
Totally.
Yeah. So, Lucy, who are we talking to today?
So in this episode, we're going to be joined by a very special guest indeed, award-winning travel writer Emma Thompson, who's painstakingly, it must be said, whittled down 3 of her favourite destinations to talk to us about. Specifically, and James, I know you didn't ask me if I've been to any of these places because you know I haven't been, because her 3 destinations are Greenland, the Marquez Islands and in Polynesia, and Iran. So,
yes.
And also really nice geographical spread of places, 3 very different destinations.
I don't think we've ever quite spanned that much geography in one podcast, have we?
Nick Butter.
Oh,
He
Nick
springs
Butter.
to mind.
Yeah. Quite possibly, but quite similar.
Yeah.
In terms of range.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm not particularly shocked that you've never been to either of any of these 3 places.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, as well, my knowledge of these 3 places is pretty low. I'd say Iran's maybe the one that I know best, and yeah, I kind of only really know it from sadly, a kind of recent news and politics kind of point of view, and actually would be really, really interested to find out a little bit more. But I think Emma is one of those writers who really kind of gets under the surface of a place, really wants to find out more about local culture and communities. And listeners, I think you're in for a real treat hearing
Definitely.
what she's got to say. Just to introduce who Emma actually is.
Yes, here we go. So Emma is an extremely well-seasoned, multi-award-winning travel journalist who has travelled and written for leading publications such as The Times, The Telegraph and National Geographic Traveller, not to mention guidebooks for the likes of Rough Guides and also us here at DK. So, welcome Emma.
Hello.
Hello. Brilliant to have you on the podcast at long last.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
As it's one of our special episodes today, we're going to be covering 3 destinations. But first, let's get to know Emma a little better. So, Emma, how did you fall into the world of travel writing?
Well, I was a bit of a nerd from early on, actually. I was travel obsessed since I think probably the age of 2, 3. I remember catching a plane. We were living up in Scotland, catching a plane down to visit my grandmother who lived in London, and looking out the window and having a very clear thought of, I have to see as much of this world as possible. Wow. And it sort of just escalated from there, really. And I would spend my lunchtimes in the library researching places, and then when I left school, when I was at uni, we had a student newspaper, and they didn't have a travel section. So I, full of gusto, was like, "You need one." So I started off doing that, and I was just a real geek. I got loads of work experience in my uni holidays, and that actually was really useful because a lot of questions I get asked is about how to break that sort of catch-22 of getting published if you're not published, but no one giving you a chance if you're not.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, I was living in Oxford at the time, and they have the Oxford Times newspaper there, and they had a 1-page travel section with a lovely guy, but I think he'd been doing it for 60 years. And I said, "Oh, can I write a piece, while I'm here?" And so I self-funded a trip and wrote about that, and that was my first published piece, and that was great. And I just did work experience with Lonely Planet and Wanderlust, and finally Brat, travel guides.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And I was just really lucky. When I finished the placement there, they said, "Do you fancy a job?" And I said, "Yes, please."
Excellent.
And obviously, Emma, you've travelled so much as a travel writer. What do you love most about the job? I guess apart from the obvious, what is it about travel writing?
Occasionally, I mean, I don't know if this sounds bad or not, but occasionally you do get to nudge the world a little. Like, I really love sort of covering destinations that, are recovering from political upheaval or a natural disaster. And occasionally, you do get the chance to cover these stories where, for instance, I was thinking like back to Turkey, in 2017. They were really reeling from like a military coup at the end of 2016, and they'd had quite a few isolated terrorist attacks. And, Turkey's a huge country, but everyone was just avoiding it en masse. And, the Foreign Office, they hadn't updated their advice. And so they lost like half their tourist numbers overnight. And all these local businesses were just reeling. And it went on for years, and maybe like 2 or 3 years. And so I went over and I did a piece there and interviewed locals who had the small businesses and small guest houses, and did a piece. And it was really nice because I got letters back from them afterwards saying that it sort of made a difference and people were coming back and they'd seen bookings increase. And so that's nice to know that sort of you're just making a small difference. That's the kick I get out of it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. And you've chosen to talk about 3 very different places today. So we're going to start off by talking about Greenland. Then we're going to, and you'll have to correct me on my pronunciation here, talk about the Marquesas?
Marquesas?
Marquesas Islands,
Marquesas?
Marquesas.
Marquesas Islands in Polynesia, and then Iran. We know you had a lot of options. You actually gave us more options than that as well. I think we had quite a difficult job at pulling that down. But how did you go down?
Geographical spread of these 3.
It was, yes.
Yeah, I think that's why we went for them. But we know you had a lot of options. How did you go about choosing them?
Well, Greenland's an interesting one because I was originally sent there because it was really being built up as the new Iceland. Iceland's sort of, getting a hard rap at the moment of being too crowded, and certain areas are.
Yes.
And everyone's like, "Oh, Greenland's next door. That's that's the nearest alternative." and it couldn't be more different in many ways. Iceland is incredibly well set up for tourism, and Greenland is. It's just not like there are no roads apart from the one main road through town. You have to get everywhere by boat or small aircraft still, and it's covered by this ancient ice cap which is the size of Spain, and the population I think it's something around 56,000, which is tiny compared to the massive landmass, are just sort of like eking out a living on the fringes. But that's the surprising thing about it. People think, it's just the ice cap, but it's actually really verdant in summer, where you've got sort of, like crowberries growing in amongst the plants, and you've got wild mushrooms, and it's great for foraging if people are into foraging. And it just has such an intact culture still because it is very new to tourism. So it's a great way of seeing sort of Inuit culture and also, I've noticed this growing trend of people really enjoying silence when they go places, or just really wanting to disconnect. And there's not a huge amount of Wi-Fi, and it has this incredible sense of silence around it. I mean, most of the soundtrack is just like the bergs cracking in the bay, or occasional like bark of one of the dogs. But it really sinks into you and chills you out, and it's lovely.
And how about the Marquesas Islands? And how did you go about picking those?
So it's so remote, this group of islands. It's about 12 islands. Only 6 of them are inhabited. But a lot of famous people have visited them. So you can come to that later if you want. But it's... There's quite a sort of lovely history of writers and artists visiting them. So I was quite intrigued.
And then finally we were talking about Iran, which I think I was actually a little bit late to join this recording because I was in a world reading about Iran. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about Iran, Emma, I must say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the most misjudged places I've been. A lot of people, are still have their opinions formed by, news reports or, the FCO warnings and things like that. And it's very different on the ground. Yes, it still has its troubles, but it's a completely different world on the ground.
Great.
3 fantastic destinations. Let's find out a lot more about them. So when did you first visit Greenland?
So I went twice. The first time was in 2018. And as I say, it was sort of this idea that it could be the new Iceland, but they were also really starting to look towards tourism because they have 2 problems. One is, as you know, it's owned by Denmark, but they rely hugely on subsidies. I think it's something like $591 million a year that they get sort of bailed out each year, which as a source of pride for them is not great. But also mining companies are sort of really sort of knocking on the door to get, there's huge deposits of like uranium and iron and things. And obviously that is not a sustainable form of income. It might be, short wealth for them, but they really want to try and do things more sustainably, which is why they're looking into the tourism. And the second time was I was sailing down the coast of Greenland and then across to northern Canada. So I spent some time there again as well. Both times were fantastic.
Really cool.
Very cool. I mean, when I think of, you sort of touched on this, Emma, but when I think of Greenland, I mean, it's just, as you said, like a huge expanse of ice, and then it's that kind of southwest corner that feels that's where that's where most
of the action is happening. And I say action as a loose term, but
what sorts of activities can you actually do in Greenland?
So they are sort of upping their game, and they will offer, in winter, like snowmobiling tours or dog sledding. Obviously, whale watching, incredible up there. It's amazing for hiking in summer. There's the Arctic Circle Trail, which I think is like 160 kilometers, where you can camp along it. Beautiful.
Amazing.
But for me, as I said, the appeal is just to get this sense of real sort of frontier life. I mean, a lot of the communities, these are not homes that have sort of, the picket fence around them, and you're more likely to have like, antlers hanging up than the washing line sort of thing. And everyone has like working dogs. And so it was just these opportunities to see, everyday activities that you just wouldn't, like, the guys would come in and they would have, be flensing a seal, like skinning the seal on the dock, which can be quite confronting for some people. But again, this is, part of their culture. They use every part of the animal. There's no waste. They don't hunt them. Just seeing, like, you'd see the drying racks out the front of the homes with whale biltong drying. And just... they've got a wonderful protected costume as well. There's one thing I'd say is like a really good start to understand Greenland is there was a guy called and forgive my pronunciation now, Knud Rasmussen. So he was half Danish and half Greenlandic, but he grew up there from when he was a child. And he sort of became sort of the father of Inuitology, and because he spoke the language, he knew how to work the dogs. And he noted down a lot of their, oral histories. And there's a really great museum in Uliasat, which is about an hour flight north of the capital Nuuk. And it's such a good place to start to really sort of get under the skin of the place a bit. Incredible sort of hand drawing etchings that he'd done and carvings, and it's really good.
Great.
Cool. So you mentioned a little bit about kind of the whale biltong and the skinning of the seal, etc. Did you actually sample any of the local food when you were there?
So they have, again, pronunciation, but it's called kinniak, which are the auk sea birds, which have been fermented inside seal skin, which is meant to be a delicacy. I haven't tried it. apparently it's more of a winter thing, and I was visiting during summer, so but maybe I got off lightly there because apparently the smell is atrocious.
I was going to say I'm not entirely sure how appetizing that sounds to me, but there's always next time.
Yeah, but they have things like muskox and obviously a lot of fish like halibut, and they smoke it, which it tastes great. It tastes great. And in fact, if you want a restaurant recommendation, there's a fantastic one that's part of a lodge. It's called Ilmenat Lodge. and it's not far from Ilulissat, and fantastic food. They sort of really reimagine the sort of Greenlandic cuisine to sort of elevate it.
It's always good to have recommends, definitely for restaurants as well.
And in terms of, like, you mentioned about the kind of lack of infrastructure as well in Greenland, have you kind of seen, is it starting to build up a little bit? Is it more accessible to go?
Not really. I mean, because of the harshness of the conditions there, just to keep the roads clear is a huge amount of work. So that's why I say it's so sparse still. So yeah, everyone just uses boats or planes to get around still, or on foot. I mean, you can you can hike to your heart's content, but no, it's still in its infancy. And Ilmenok Lodge, as I mentioned, that's sort of part of a new generation where they're trying to do this sustainable tourism model. But you know, in most towns you'll visit, there's maybe like 1 or 2 places to stay, maybe 1 restaurant. Most people just grab supplies from the supermarket and do their own thing. It's as I say, it's great frontier living, and it feels very adventurous. It's lovely.
Yeah, it sounds adventurous. Yeah. Very cool.
Very cool.
It really does.
very cool. I imagine
freezing in winter.
Incredibly cool.
just a little bit cool. Okay, cool. Well, we've heard about Greenland. Now on to the Marquesas.
So Emma, the Marquesas Islands, which are in Polynesia, what did you make of them? I mean, they're incredibly remote and paradise-like. What did you make of them when you, arrived?
Well, it's funny. So I'm going to not even paraphrase, quote 2 writers now, because so Paul Theroux, he visited in 1991 when he was writing the Happy Isles of Oceania, and he said they were the most beautiful islands on earth, and I love this, the tableau on which travellers can paint their fantasies. So that gives you a sort of an idea of their beauty. I mean, it's these jagged, jungle-clad mountains tumbling down into just pristine, the pristine Pacific. Whereas Robert Louis Stevenson, who when he visited in, I think it was 1888, he said, they're just like the Scottish Highlands. so, not everyone's cup of tea, but no pleasing some.
It's quite a long way to go just to see the Scottish Highlands,
exactly.
right? Well, what did you think? Which side are you, Paul, or are you Robert?
Again, I'm just drawn to these sort of, raw places that are sort of really off the beaten track, and it is entirely that. It's again, they have a very intact local culture that's highly steeped in sort of mysticism and shares, these links with Easter Island and the rest of the Polynesian sort of islands. And it's just a place, and this sounds a bit cliche, that you need to experience and just be in. Again, it's not a sense that there is this big bucket list of things to see and do to tick off. It's just this vibe. It's this, there's a sense of communion with nature that isn't cliched. It's entirely their way of life that really sort of connects you to something deeper, if that doesn't sound too cheesy. No. And it does stay with you.
And wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about the people who live on the islands?
So they, I think they were, I might be wrong here, but I think they were one of the last Polynesian archipelagos to be colonized, just because of the sheer distance. Like everyone would be, in the outrigger canoes sort of paddling. And it's, and to give you a sense, I mean, you can fly there from Tahiti now, but I took a cargo boat, and I think it takes 3 days of non-stop sailing just to get there from Tahiti. So it gives you a sense of their isolation.
Oh, wow.
And they, like most sort of communities in that area, they really were put through the ringer. I mean, they had, the Spanish, I think, turned up in sort of the 1500s, as they were like to do. And, when they arrived, the communities were still practicing cannibalism. Everyone was covered in tattoos. Of course, they freaked out, shot a whole load of them. And that was, the community's first sort of encounter with Europeans. And then they were sort of left alone for a couple hundred years. Catholic missionaries turned up, again freaked out. They were far too naked, enjoying sex far too much, and sort of stamped all that out and banned the practicing of tattooing, which is incredibly like a cornerstone of their culture. It's I can go into a little bit if you like. It's wonderful.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So essentially, the tattoo artist in the communities, they act almost in a sort of shaman-like way, where if a man has lived first of all, the job is passed down within those families. It's not like anyone can become like a tattoo artist there. And if a man has lived a good life, he should be entirely covered with tattoos by the time he dies. So every sort of event of his life is marked with a set of symbols. And, you would go to, and this is still practiced now, you would go to one of these men and you tell him your life story, and then he chooses the symbols where they should go and marks them on your body. And I actually had a funny story. So I was interviewing quite a few of the guys out there about it. And one of them I became quite friendly with, and he said, would you like one? Because women have it too.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And it was only when I was sort of on the lying down where I suddenly thought, wait a minute. I have like no say over the size, shape, form of this thing that's going to be on my body forever. But luckily it turned out really nicely.
Oh, good. Oh, so you did get one.
Yeah. It was. It's on the side of my body, but it was quite painful when he hit the ribs. I had to do some serious meditating. But
yeah.
Is it kind of like a sort of stick and poke style thing?
Yeah,
or,
they do use pig bone and then hammer away.
And did you tell him some of your life story, and then he chose? Oh, that's amazing, Emma! What an experience!
Yeah, it was amazing. It was.
What did he depict? Or
so it's hard to describe, but essentially, so there's a hibiscus flower in the center, which is a very common flower on the islands, and then spanning out from that is a sort of series of symbols that sort of flow northwards and southwards, and the hibiscus flower depicts the division between land and sea, and so the bottom symbols are associated with sea and safe travel, because obviously I came there by boat. And then the top one, he actually gave me one of their ancient symbols, which is two actually. One symbolizes mana, which is like the energy that sort of the life force of the islands, essentially, and the second is a tiki figure, and the tikis are very similar to the moai on Easter Island.
Okay. Yeah.
And they symbolize their ancestors. So it's a sort of nice token of like our ancestors go with you sort of thing. So.
Oh, it's amazing. That sounds incredible. What an experience.
Yeah, I was very lucky.
And what a lot to fit into the one tattoo as well.
Yeah.
You're going to get one tattoo. There you go. That's go to Marquez's. So yeah, do you have any? So if someone did want to visit Marquez's, you've said about, you can fly from Tahiti now, but are there any like sort of specific travel tips for getting there or experiencing it?
Like as I said, you can fly, but there is this boat, the Aranui 5, which I would far recommend sailing with if you can, because as I said, it's a working cargo ship, so it takes like cement, cars, sugar to the islands, and then it's got places for passengers as well. I mean, it's not like that rough and ready, don't worry, there's still like a dining room and things like that, and nice rooms. And you just really get that sense of arriving in a place slowly, and it also it stops off at most of the main islands as well, so that's a really good way of seeing them. There's a couple of ceremonial complex sites which are worth seeing, sort of on Nikohiva, which is which you'll stop at. Nikohiva is probably the quietest capital you're ever going to encounter in your life. I mean, there's literally like a bank, one shop, and a church. But then the other island, which is Hivaoa, is obviously famous. I made reference to it being visited by some famous people in the past. So
yes,
as well as like Paul Theroux and Robert Louis Stevenson, you had Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, He jumped ship there in the 1840s because he didn't enjoy his whaling job, and he ended up writing, which, if you want some background reading, a book called Teepee, which is a novel. And then Paul Gauguin and Jacques Brel are both buried there. So Jacques Brel, the famous Belgian singer, it was in the latter years of his life. He was sadly dying from lung cancer, and but the locals loved him. Like, he would use his plane to like drop mail off between the islands and take the kids to school between islands. Gauguin, not so much. He had got several underage girls pregnant, spread syphilis. Was drunk most of the time on absinthe. They didn't love him so much. I mean, there is still like a small museum to him because obviously, his painting was incredible. But so they're both buried in the Cimetière du Calvaire, which is on Hiva-Oa. So you can't miss seeing those.
All right. Well, that's a great introduction to the Marquesas, and onwards to quite a different country now. We're going to talk about Iran. If you've been inspired by this episode and want to start planning your next adventure, then DKR Witness will have the book for you. Explore hundreds of destinations in our newly updated DKR Witness or Top 10 guides, get insider tips on the world's biggest cities with our new Local series, or get bucket list planning with our inspirational books, including The New Gardens of the World and Hike. Find all those and so much more via the link in our episode bio or by visiting your local bookshop. So Emma, can you quickly just remind us a little bit about why you chose to talk about Iran?
I think because it is just such a misunderstood country where so many of our opinions are formed by the news reports and, foreign office warnings. And I just wanted to see what the reality was on the ground. And I was just very lucky that National Geographic were open to commissioning me. And so I went for them. And because I think, do you remember when that film Argo came out about the hostage situation in the 70s? Yeah, I think, a lot of people's opinions have sort of stopped around that period because that also marked the transition from sort of the Persian monarchy to the reign of the Ayatollahs. And obviously there was a huge shift in culture then. But we forget that its history extends so much further back than that. And there's actually some really surprising elements to it. This is, also the birthplace of Zoroastrianism, which is like one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. And they have a place linked to Zoroastrianism, which are the Towers of Silence. So Zoroastrians, they believe that if you, burnt a corpse, it would pollute the air, or if you buried it, it would pollute the earth. And so what they do is they would lay the corpses in circles on these Towers of Silence, where, sorry, it's not very nice, but they would essentially be picked clean by the birds, but that was considered a clean death. And these, this is a practice that's 3,000 years old, and some of these towers still exist on the outskirts of Yazd, which is one of the main towns. So you can visit places like that. You've obviously got the UNESCO site of Persepolis, which was founded by Darius the Great. And one of the great facts I love about this, Iran's obviously given, criticized heavily for its politics. But this was a place where Darius the Great hosted essentially what was the first United Nations. So he invited ambassadors from all across the empire to gather and have like the first democratic discussions. So there'd be like the Nabateans and the Babylonians, and that's something that gets lost a bit.
Yeah.
And then obviously, it's
the recent history kind of like overshadows
exactly
that kind of
And it was also, on the main artery of the Silk Road. So you've got this huge, incredible history of trade, the silks and the spices and the ivory and the porcelain. And what people also don't know is, you're not just staying in, clinical hotels. You have these caravanserai, which during the Silk Road heydays, they would be posted every 20 miles. And it was 20 miles because that was the length a camel could walk in a day. And, there used to be like over 1,000 in Iran. And there's one that's been sort of restored, and you can stay there and you're sleeping on a mattress in the stables or the former stables. But it's just incredible, that sort of, preserved sense of history. So it's these elements you wouldn't expect. Yeah.
And like kind of like connecting with like those journeys that so many people have taken in the past as well, I guess, and like kind of seeing it a bit through their eyes.
Exactly.
Cool. Iran is absolutely huge. I don't think I appreciated how big it is. Do you have any sort of favourite places in Iran, or anywhere that you would recommend listeners go if they, if they are heading that way?
So one place that is well visited now, but is unmissable, is Esfahan, because it was the centre. I mean, the main square that it centres around, Nashijan Square, is the largest in the world, I believe. And it once served as the polo field where there was a palace on one flank of the rectangle, and it was this incredible massive polo field. I think they might have played with human heads at one point, but don't quote me on that. But but it has this incredibly rich artistic community where you have Mina Karai, which is sort of copper work that's been hand painted in sort of beautiful aqua blue and white colours. It's incredibly detailed. And you have miniaturists, which are men that can paint portraits that are no bigger than your thumb, but they paint them with a single like the single hair of a paintbrush. You have to hold a magnifying glass up and you can see the individual hairs on a man's beard, and it's incredible work. So it's just wonderful, wandering around there. And then the other really incredible place is Shiraz, because that's where Hafez and Sadi, the Persian poets, were born. So it's a very romantic city. It's like they call it the city of like roses and wine and nightingales, and you also have, I mean, it's been quite Instagram to death now, but there is it's the Pink Mosque, or Nazir ul Mulk Mosque, and if you visit in the morning, its windows are these incredible sort of fractured stained glass patterns, and in the morning the sunlight shines through them to create these kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor of the mosque, and it's quite a spiritual experience, and so that's very popular to visit. So if you're going the first time, I definitely recommend those places.
Very, very cool. And you sort of have talked about this a little bit already, but like obviously there's lots of preconceptions about what Iran is today, but are there any other kind of like preconceptions or myths you'd like to bust about Iran?
So one thing I would say is that the division between the old and the new generations is becoming more and more marked. I mean, I'm sure you've heard stories of the younger generation. They'll sort of host house parties and they'll sort of, walk through the streets sort of covered, and then, they get inside and they throw off and they're, head to toe in Gucci, and it's a very stylish place. And I was reminded that over and over again. I visited the country twice now, and they are very keen to make it clear to visitors that, not all that you hear is the truth. And that they are very progressive. A lot of the women, are, in full-time university education, doing engineering degrees, all that. And I think one of my favourite memories actually was I was outside a restaurant, and an old lady was sat on a bench, and we got to talking, and she had like 2 teeth or something in her mouth. Like, she was very, very old. And she said, she took my hand and sort of squeezed it, and she's like, "Oh, guests are, so dear to us." And she said, "We're not like Saudi Arabia." And she sort of drew up her black veil to sort of signal the wearing of the burqa.
Yeah.
And she said, "We're not like that." And she said, "Anyway, it's your queen who's not free." She said, "She's always having to wear those same outfits all the time." And I was like, fair enough.
Yeah. Good point.
And
I mean, I was thinking with the Jubilee stuff the other weekend, like how all the kids have to wear those little sailor uniforms and stuff. No kid wants to do that. That's a good point.
So, and I just loved the way she sort of flipped the script on me, and I was like, and that's definitely what you'll get if you go to Iran. It's it's always hitting the headlines occasionally, but most of the times it's stable enough to visit. So.
Yeah. Did you visit Tehran as well when you were there?
Briefly. I mean, it sounds awful, I tend to avoid capitals because they're sort of a microcosm of their own. They're not hugely representative. I mean, Tehran is like very progressive. I mean, a lot of the women will just sort of have their headscarf dangling off the back of the bun of their head or something. Whereas as you go further out, it's perhaps more adhered to or whatever. But so I prefer to visit the sort of more out of the way towns. I find they're more representative of, the general sense of a place. Yeah,
the real kind of culture and stuff. Well, you've given us a really interesting window into around there, and hopefully inspire a couple of visits as well.
Yeah, we'll have to go.
And also, can I just say, it's just so wonderful at last, Emma, to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Fabulous. Just could listen to you all day, honestly. Thank you so much.
As we say, listener, Emma did give us a long, long list as well. And we kind of picked out 3 very, very different examples you gave us. But I feel like you could talk about so many different countries.
What were your other suggestions, Emma?
I think I recommended Sudan.
Sudan, that was it.
There's St. Helena as well.
Yeah, that's a quirky one.
Yeah, that is really, really quirky. But thank you so much for talking us through those 3 examples. And so wonderful to have you on the podcast. And I'm sure we shall catch up with you very soon.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Genuinely, that was so fascinating. Emma genuinely is a prolific traveller and writer. And as we said, she's won various awards and is hugely respected in the industry. But you can tell why she's so spectacular, just how she managed to set the scene for us, and her incredible anecdotes. The tattoo one, I just loved.
What an
amazing experience.
What a great tattoo. Like, I feel like I've got a couple of tattoos, and people always get really bored of my answers when I just say that they're like things I like or something. But that's like one of the best tattoo stories you can have. And I think it's like a really nice example. We talked about it in the intro, but of how Emma kind of like beds into local culture, how she kind of how she tries to get under the skin of what a place is really, really about. That the old lady in Iran, and
I know so good. Sorry, I was just thinking, James, I love your description of get under the skin when talking about Emma's tattoo.
It did sound a bit painful.
It did sound painful. But yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful episode, and Emma was a fabulous guest. So big thank you to her. And if you want to follow Emma on all her incredible adventures and read some of her incredible writing listeners, you can catch up with her on Instagram at Emma Thompson Travels.
Yes, and I highly recommend reading some of her articles and pieces as well. Like, if you've just got a taster of what Emma's about in this podcast, there's a hell of a lot more out there. So so in our next episode, it's one of those ones, Lucy, we don't know where we're going. Who knows?
Idea.
We're ahead of schedule here.
Yes.
But, listener, maybe you have got an idea of somewhere where we should go next. If so, let us know at DK Eyewitness. It's all of our social handles. And but until then, it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me.
And we shall see you very soon.
Where to Go was produced by the team at DK Eyewitness and the wonderful Julia Baker. It was presented by James Atkinson and Lucy Richards and mastered by Johnny Coddington at Bottle Rocket Recording. For more information about DK Eyewitness, follow us on social media at DK Eyewitness or visit dk.com/eyewitness.
And don't forget to please like, rate, review and subscribe the show wherever you get your podcasts. Your support means so much to us.